So now it's basically your turn. We start basically with a short discussion over here on stage. And I think we'd like to start with the question, what kind of society, say digital society or whatever society, would we like to live in, or would you like to live in? So there are different positions that will let them basically encounter each other in order to create some interesting interaction.
So I've been thinking about Samusin, and I think that the biggest impact that digital technology can have on society is that maybe it can, talking maybe controversially, save the democracy from failing. You know, you're seeing this thing where people say, okay, democracy, and you have people elect and they elect Trump, or you have people elect and they tend to elect Erdogan or someone who will actually abolish democracy. And it does not have to do with the fact that those people are bad in any way, but I think it has to do with the fact that they have very valid concerns and they have no capacity, or they do not understand that what they elect doesn't address their concerns. So maybe you can use technology to have people better informed. I had this assistance thing to help the technology, to help people relate information to their everyday experience, to empower them to make better decisions together. So maybe it's an idealistic thing, but I think it's empowering people to make better decisions, to relate complex things to their everyday experience. It could be a huge game changer in making society better.
So in other words, democracy is not an outdated technology from your point of view?
I was born in communist Poland. I was telling someone, so there was this thing about democracy, non-democracy. I like this citation that somebody said, is that democracy is a very, very bad system, but it's the best one that has ever been invented, right? And I think this is the point. And technology is not an outdated. It's not about technology. It's not a technology. It's an ideal. It's a great ideal that we should maintain. And obviously, within technological and other boundary conditions that have now evolved, it's getting more and more difficult to maintain that ideal in a stable way. And I think it's our job to change this technology in such a way that it supports us in maintaining that ideal, rather than it sort of make this ideal go away.
Okay, yeah, fine. Thank you very much. So, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I completely agree. So choice, freedom, agency is Marcia said, autonomy, privacy. I mean, I was reminded, talking about privacy, I was 4 years ago I started teaching in China, and then about ethics and IT, and students didn't care too much about privacy. You actually had to explain what it meant, what we meant by the term. Now when I come there, 4 years later, you know, that's the first thing they start talking about, and so it will not go away. These things are very deep concerns. They affect us all as human beings, and it's exactly as you said. It's upon us to try and shape the world and the technology in such a way that it accommodates these basic concerns, you know, that we have as human beings, and that everyone will be caring about his or her children, that they have the freedom to choose and to travel and to be healthy and to be secure.
What about the citizen score?
Well, that's something that a year ago they didn't know too much about, and then we asked our Chinese students who were looking for topics to write their thesis or essays about. I said, well, you know, try to find something about and they were really appalled. They were appalled to find out about these plans. So these things are changing. It takes some time. You need to read, you know, investigative journalism. And then people will start to realize. I mean, filter bubble, echo chamber. A couple of years ago, these were subjects that we were working on, but now it's the Guardian. It's every newspaper. It's common knowledge, and so that's reassuring in a sense, because people will start to think about these things, and they will start to realize that these may be effects that are exhibited by the environments in which they live and spend time.
Virginia, how much nudging is good for society?
Ooh, how much nudging? Personally, I don't think that nudging is good for society. I think that people people should be, the education is more important than nudging, and by having investing on education, people will be nudging themselves, and that I think is what is the important way to go. Not external nudging, but more intrinsic nudging that you can achieve by education. If I might go back to your initial question about which digital society you want to live in, my first reaction was that I actually don't want to live in a digital society. I want to live in a physical society, and there is a lot of benefits which digital can bring us. And when I experience every day, I come originally from Portugal. I lived for 30 years in the Netherlands, and the distance between Portugal and the Netherlands has been becoming smaller and smaller because of digital capabilities. I can now talk to my mom any moment of the day and be interacting as almost as I would be there, which 30 years ago it would be undifficult and costly and so on. So as the same way that digital society has bring us together physically, so distance become much smaller, I think one of the important things that we should invest on is also making the cultural differences and the individual differences smaller, that we can better understand and interact with each other in a way that we really can understand and create the bridges between people.
Yeah, that's great. I think everyone appreciates that, but it's not enough for Paul, you know, he really loves to swim in data, you know, this immersive world. So I've seen him already with Google Glass. Why don't you have it with you today?
The device is just not technologically far enough to be useful. It was an experimental device. I used to wear it at different, and it was really both an experiment in technology, how you use it, but as social experiments, how people react to it in different settings. But yes, I do believe that eventually we will all be running around with something like Google Glass, only it would just look like normal glasses or your lenses. Because it is true that we now have this digital layer overlaid over our physical world and have the ability to view this digital layer at will. Having the ability to have this digital layer enhance your experience of the physical world is just something people will not be willing to forgo.
So you believe in a post-privacy world?
I don't think it's not post-privacy. When I talk about privacy, I have this slide, two slides I like to show. And it's a picture of a person with a red flag going in front of a car. And you may know where it comes from. When first automobiles were introduced, people realized they would change everything. They would change how the city is there, potential danger. And a reflex was do something so that things will not change. And it didn't work. Which doesn't mean that it left like a free-for-all, cars roaming and killing everyone in their way. We invested a huge amount of legislative, technological, ethical effort to make sure that cars do as little harm as possible. And I stand for data. You will not see a world where the concept of privacy the way it used to be before. The genie is out of the bottle. Which doesn't mean that we should just say privacy is out and you let the companies do what they want.
The question is now, who would the genie serve, right? Is it us, or is it companies, or is it corporations, or kings for that, or...
This one remark I want to make, we have this discussion often, I very strongly believe in it. The problem is that you want sort of the equality of weapons. Once you start restricting production and the use of data, you mostly have impact of a small man trying to use the data, to use information, to fight for his rights, to fight companies. The big and bad guys, they will not care. So the irony of this is, by making too much privacy protection, data restriction, and other laws, you may actually be tipping the balance in favor of those whom you do not want to, you add power to.
So, Carl, do you think our society is basically ready for all that data and artificial intelligence and technology? Do we have the moral basis, the legal basis, the cultural basis, or how many more years would it take?
What else should I
Feel free to talk.
I cannot talk multicultural basis. But I think we're still in an extremely exploratory phase. The whole discussion about privacy is probably part of a larger problem, that in this digital space we don't yet know how to draw boundaries, right? And this is not the boundaries certain populist parties want to draw, but it's just the ability to identify something and then to be able to distinguish what is inside and what is outside, right? And this is a very fundamental principle of organization of any system. If you cannot distinguish what is inside and outside of something, right, the system has no structure and it just falls apart, right? And the discussion about how we leak away information even without being in a social network is a typical example, right? We're like cells on a boundary, without boundary, losing kind of our resources and dissolving continuously and trying to reconstruct ourselves. I think that this is, and we're still probably very much at the beginning of this whole process of understanding of how we structure this digital space in a meaningful way. And in the meantime, the big ones grab, of course, like this is as it is, right? There's a new resource, there's no rules, so we grab, and you know, you don't even have to put claims. I mean, in the Wild West, at least you had to go to some office and ask for a claim. Even that needs not to be done these days, right? So I think we're really, really at the beginning here. Now, I think what is missing? I think probably one of the maybe biggest problems we're facing, and this has fundamentally nothing to do with digital, but it will be kind of the big question that we have to answer if you want to do all this fancy stuff and run around with glasses and so on. I think we have to get somehow a grip on the problem of inequality in this world, right? Because the discussion we have here is, I think, fairly theoretical for more than half of the population of the world, right? They have other concerns. They would like to have a glass of clean water, for example. That's for them a fundamental concern, right? So we have it, right? We think it is normal, it is not. And so I found it, by the way, very interesting, this talk about optimization of society and that there must be a certain degree of inequality, because it's not irreconcilable, but I don't think that we're talking about this kind of inequality. It's a much more fundamental structural one, and at the moment I'm even not sure where the digital revolution is helping in resolving the problem. Sometimes I get the feeling it's even making things worse. People believe that it is doing some good somewhere, but at the same time it's also accelerating developments that make things work, because we, as you know, like to point out a lot, it is accelerating basically the exhausting of the resources, right? We're doing more and more stuff that consume more and more resources, and of course only a small fraction of the planet is participating in that, and the others are even left more behind. So I think that if we don't solve this problem, we can forget about Google Glasses in 20 years anyway, so the problem will be solved in very different ways.
All right, so I'd like to ask the question now, how safe is democracy? Could it be torn down? Is it in danger? How big is the danger given all the data that's now available about everyone, given that we're living in massive surveillance society where the power structure is so unequal, right? And given that we probably cannot fully control that these are the information systems that are around. So I'd like to ask you, so I would like to comment on this.
Could you please? I just need a definition of democracy. What is a democratic country? Is it the one who is most powerful and electing the president with less votes?
No, I don't think this is the definition that we would give, but democracy has a number of features, which includes protection also of minorities, which includes a power balance or a division of power, which includes checks and balances and transparency and participation and a number of other things. So this is, I guess, the kind of view that most people here in these countries which have on democracy. So it's not 51% dictate everyone in the country, right?
And any majority vote, look at the UK, would also be unfair.
there is an issue, and that's why people say democracy may be broke as we have it today. Also, it's being challenged by social media and the way it's being used, hate speech and fake news and all this kind of things. I mean, there are issues that we need to talk about, and I personally believe that democracy needs to be upgraded, but I don't think it's outdated. Who would really want to sacrifice human rights and human values for basically a nice service for comfort? I'm not sure most people would do that. Okay, but there was somebody who wanted to comment, so let's go over.
So I guess you can never say that there is democracy or there is no democracy. It's always a continuum of freedom or whatever you understand under democracy that always changed. So you got classical philosophers then commenting on politeia versus democracy, where democracy is already the disintegrated common society in which the demagogues have won. So that was how, I don't remember whether Aristotle or I think Aristotle prescribed the words. But also now, what you define now as the set of democratic properties what would be a copy of one of the modern democracies, and not necessarily something that would be also universal. So in the sense we are now discussing the danger to democracy coming from the use of data is also something that can be a facade democracy, can be a democracy that is democratic as much as the Soviet Union had the most democratic constitution in the world. So, but be steered and influenced from behind the stages. So what would be the quantitative indicators or parameters of our democracy we are steering towards? We would like to steer the world towards.
Yeah, maybe the extent to which we can actually control our own life affairs. I think this is something that's important, but that's my spontaneous point of view. Maybe that's Bridget, you have to go very close.
Very close, okay. As someone who has lived and been born in a country which was not democratic at the time, and now there are questions whether it's democratic, I don't see that there is a kind of equality between democracy and human values and human rights. I think democracy is basically a tool that we have, and I agree with you that it's not the best tool, but it's the best we have to organize our society in the way that we uphold the values and the rights, human rights that we believe are important. But it's not necessarily the only way. So if there are possibilities or other ways to organize our society which ensure the values and rights that we believe in, but it's not in the way that we see democracy now, I don't really see that there is any danger by endangering democracy that we directly have to endanger also the values and rights that we have.
So you seem to indicate that there might be other forms of governance that might be superior, and yeah, why not? I mean, there's a chance that this is true, but then the question is, should our politicians kind of surprise people with a new solution, or should they discuss it with them? I don't know, what would be the procedure?
Do we need politicians?
I mean, for me, I like to think about democracy being a continuum. And I think democracy, for me, is a very general principle that is more defined by what it's not is than what it is. So democracy is a state in which a single person does not exploit, does not use its power to control others for his own interest. And I think democracy is a very general principle which has had many, many different instantiation over time. And this instantiation would change, but those few very fundamental knots, things that are not democracy, will stay there, and that's what we should retain. We will get some sort of an e-democracy, and maybe you're right, we don't need politicians. We'll have they had this party in Germany, Pirate Party, the fluid democracy thing. It didn't work, it was flawed. But you know, it may actually end with something like this. But it will retain some core principles of what you should not have in human society.
Yeah, and Dirk already mentioned, I completely agree, that's about the continuum that philosopher John Dewey said, so we have to, every day again, we have to reinvent democracy, we have to work on it, it's something that we need to, that we create, that we think about systems, but the important ingredient, I think, is the non-dominance or no dictator. There's no one who affects what the social preference is, but the social preference tracks in an interesting way the individual preferences. I think that, and of course these the kind of human values, agency, freedom, are all respected in that context. There is a kind of a slight confusion between but a useful distinction can be made between two functions of democracy, like Dewey and philosopher Putnam, and recently more scholars have written about epistemic conceptions of democracy, that is, it's justified because it's the smartest solution or the smartest arrangement to arrive at the smartest solutions for our collective problems. But that could go in the direction, for example, of plural voting, where experts have more weighty input in the whole decision procedure than others. If that leads to better outcomes. And then the contrast is a moral justification of democracy, where it is one person, one vote, because you are not more important or not more weighty than I am. So it's everyone is respected as an individual for his or her moral qualities, and is represented as such in these procedures. So these are two different conceptions of democracy. There's an epistemic one, and the utilitarian one, and there's a moral one.
Would it be allowed that politicians or corporations or private people surprise us with a new political system, kind of turn on a digital algorithms to run the world, and surprise us with that, or would that be a coup?
If it would be imposed and enforced, then that would be a coup. Here's the difference between what Popper called the context of justification and discovery. If someone miraculously came up with a very brilliant idea how to run societies like ours, and would propose that and put it here on the table, we could discuss it and decide whether we would implement it or not. Then I think that would be interesting.
So basically, it needs to be discussed with the public.
I think so. Yeah. In order to have legitimacy.
I fully agree. Couldn't agree more. Okay, so now the question: what could digital technology do for you, for society, and for nature, which it doesn't do so far? You know, if you had 3 wishes, what kind of wishes would that be? Let's ask the audience. That's today, 3 wishes. You know. Well, surprise, somebody says
Three wishes, huh?
I guess I was one.
Well, what I would actually like is for the digital technology to contribute to more, what was mentioned before, more equality or equitable society, because the internet started out as a very democratic thing, it still is, I think, but technology tends to be concentrated in small portions, or big corporations, the mass, as we know, Google and Amazon and so the like. And I mean, my wish would be for this to redistribute this and not to accumulate wealth even more. I guess that's my only wish.
Okay, just one. Okay, there's another wish. Yeah, please go ahead.
I can think of two issues that I would have. One is about education. Technology, digital technology could help us kind of make education better in a lot of senses. Delivering, education to the, especially as one of you mentioned, the divide of the developing countries. That's our world as well. The world is not just the world, people like us sitting here without not really worrying about food and some basic needs, the meeting of those. Solving those actually eventually help us here problems. The other is actually, for me, I think of digital technology is to really making people more cautious, more aware of the consequence of the unintended consequences and the very complex feedbacks of our individual behavior, our activities, and making that more explicit for us, making us understand and know of the consequences of, no matter big and large, small decisions we make, what are the potential consequences on other people, especially, people from with long distance from us, which we don't realize, for almost the whole history of humanity.
Okay, yes, from now, please. Yeah. Over there, yes.
Thank you. I personally feel that some of my personal freedoms are highly at risk, so I would wish to be more in control over the data that I produce or leave behind. I would like to be explicitly informed if some data about me is collected, and I would like to see it visually. This would be my first wish. My second wish would be that there is more talking about, I think there should be more talking about what we actually do. I think at the moment there is like an empirical way of how we generate software and how we try things out. Nobody's talking about what does this actually do. So I think my second wish is that there's more talking about what do we actually do here, what possible consequences would be there. And my third wish would be if there is something I want to know about software or data or technology, I want to be able to learn it.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Let's wait and see how long it takes until these wishes come true. I think they're all fulfillable in principle. Paul, could we build AI systems to protect us, kind of a digital defense system that reads terms and conditions, that checks data flows out of our computers and devices and what's collected about us and all these kind of things, and helps us to make sure that our interests are not violated?
So that would partially be this vision behind these personal digital assistants. If they are not something that Google installs on your device to serve their purpose, but would be something that you would try to adapt to your needs, your preferences, and act on your behavior in the digital domain to make sure that if data is pulled from you, it's towards causes that you support. That certainly is, I think, a very necessary tool to enable people to maintain privacy, to be able to really make impact in the digital society. Having said that, it would be nice if we could generate energy out of nothing, but there are fundamental laws of nature. And it's very clear that you will never ever be able to build any sort of AR or computer device that will make sure that your data doesn't end up where you don't want it to. There are fundamental laws of nature. We had this discussion that there's absolutely no way you can control the information that is out there about you. Because if you show on a fundamental level that you can have a piece of information A that has absolutely nothing to do with you, a piece of information B that has nothing to do with you, you put them together and it reveals something about you. And this is just basic principle.
But then the question is, should we be allowed to reveal whatever we can reveal, or should there be something like a norm, like you shouldn't do certain kind of things, right? So in principle, while waiting for the bus at the bus stop, we could probably pick pocket versus steal people's money. In principle, we could look into the living rooms and sleeping rooms of our neighbors. We could stare in the restaurant at this loving couple kissing each other, whatever, you know. But we don't do this because we've learned you shouldn't do such a thing, you know. How long will it take until we learn to behave on the internet?
I think so. You know, actually we are learning it. You know, you have this thing that most people will look away when you type in your password. Right? So I agree with you. These are the things about ethical and moral norms. We had this discussion, you know, nothing prevents me from taking a microphone, and smashing your skull. There's no technical. There's no technical protection in the microphone that makes it impossible. It's ethical, moral, and other norms. I think you're perfectly right. That is in the end what needs to happen for those systems to function. It's not making it impossible, it's making it difficult, and then people understanding that some things are plain wrong. And not everybody will understand it, they are criminal always.
Yes, indeed, I think it's very much, the point is not that we should restrict everything and eliminate all the issues, because then in a sense we are taking away our own responsibility, because you get so used or so cushioned to all kinds of things that then you don't really think anymore about your own actions in the digital or in the physical world. So in the same way that you learn, it's not no physical impediment to beat you on the head, but I would not do it because you learn that those things are not done. The same way, if we create too many digital impediments for things not to happen, we will not learn what is proper behavior and will not take responsibility. And even worse is the effect of autopilot. So if you get used that your life online goes on autopilot and your assistants take care of all the problems. The moment that something happens that the system cannot take care of, then you have lost awareness of what's happening. And then it's much more difficult for you to take your own responsibility. So I strongly believe that we have to build the systems in a way that we keep and ensure that we understand our own responsibilities and not take too much of that, give away too much of our responsibility with the ease of use of the system.
So is digital technology upgrading or downgrading us for this event? I will answer.
I just wanted to quickly add a point to that because I think it's really important. I think there is no technical means to distinguish between personalization and discrimination. Because at the end of the day, it's exactly the same thing, right? It's just the intention of use that's different. But I think the only way to deal with that is having norms, laws, whatever, and also kind of consequences, right? So you have to react if you have misbehavior. But technically, and we see it happening, right? If you have personalized advertisements, it can be also already be personalized discrimination because you're paying more, because your profile tells you you will be willing to pay more, and so it's identical, right? So
in principle, we have this idea that those are classification problems, but one of them is more to our disadvantage and the other more to our advantage, right? So we would expect, of course, that our personal data would be used to our advantage, not to our disadvantage.
that is what you can hope to.
Yeah.
So it's the outcome, the negative outcome is one, but the other thing is we deem the use of certain data or information in a particular context as morally irrelevant. So for example, if we talk about gender or sexual preference or psychiatric past in a particular context, that may be okay to talk about it in another context, but not in this context. And then when we make distinctions between people and we refer to those attributes, then that's morally inappropriate. So and then you make distinctions which are, discriminatory. So I was about to come back to Virginia's point and the other point about nudging, and your point about that we may be moving to a world, if we do, or we go too far along the lines of what Paul suggested, and that we outsource our moral reasoning to digital assistants, that we may face this problem of moral de-skilling. as we may face it when we go too far in nudging. Right? So what you do with nudging and with moving to a world where IT prevents us from doing the things that are morally forbidden, because in this world we can do what is morally forbidden. If we go to a world where it's impossible to do what's morally forbidden, then we don't have to think, because we can just, you know, if I cannot open that door in the back of this room, then probably I'm not authorized to do it. So I bypass my moral reflection whether I should or not, or is it appropriate for me or not to do this. So both nudging and this kind of advanced way of supporting people are not helping us if we do that. So I think we had a summer retreat in this beautiful place owned by the University of Zurich, and the week was about moral technologies. So that's technologies that support people qua moral person. And this aspect is an aspect of it, that we want people to exercise that moral reasoning, questioning, discussion, deliberation. So that's something that we also need to pay attention to.
I mean, this is even more sophisticated. Some of the personalization that we might find acceptable might have implications that we wouldn't find acceptable. So assume that there are health insurances that charge you a different price depending on what you eat. You know, if you eat too much sugar, too much fat, if you don't move much, don't do any sports, and you pay a higher price. And many people would say, okay, why not? You know, should those who eat salads and exercise and all this, should they pay a lower price? Now, it might turn out, however, that in the end, men and women, on average, pay a different price for their insurance. Or that Christians, Jews, Muslims also pay different prices because they have different eating habits, right? So suddenly we don't find that funny anymore. So there are kind of indirect implications potentially that we need to learn to also keep in mind while we're doing these kind of analysis and personalizations, and there are hidden moral constraints.
I can give you a very nice example related to this. So there is a well-known researcher from Stanford who has been studying following problem by looking at decisions of courts, whether a computer could predict basically the verdict. So it was whether someone should be released or not from some background data, right? So, and of course he could show that a prediction algorithm would do actually a pretty good job, better than most of the judges under certain circumstances. But what I found the most interesting in the study is that from the data he could use everything, income level, whatever, but he had to remove a few attributes like sex, the race, and religion. And now if you think about typical population of criminals in the US, of course these were, in some of them were very strong indicators, right? But for political reason you had to remove it, right? So it was exactly pointing to this issue, right? If you want to do these things, then you will start to do some artificial limitations, and then you will find yourself in very awkward situations at the end.
So actually, a comment of things. One, what Jerome said about, when I talk about these personal digital agents, I didn't really mean that they would sort of do the ethical decisions for us. It was rather like they would actually learn our ethical position and try to act in the digital sphere in accordance with it. Because the point is that even when you have this ethics, the whole thing is so complex, it's so quick, that we may not react ourselves. And the other thing I'm missing in this discussion is something that there's this very nice saying, no pain, no gain, or there's no such thing as free lunch. And we as scientists and technologists very often do the following. Somebody comes and says, you know, this technology can do this and this harm. And we say, oh yeah, we can fix it. And you know, then come next harm, we can fix it. And there's this notion of trying to create the stuff that we can build things that are perfectly safe. We can build things that will do no harm. This digital technology will do harm. It will kill people. There's absolutely no doubt about this, that people will die because of privacy violations. Now, we accepted 100 years ago that we want to have cars. And cars kill people every year. And they do that because if you move a ton with a certain speed, sooner or later you kill someone. What I mean is that we make a social trade-off. We say that this technology saves more lives than it takes. That this technology does more good than bad. I think for me, when you come up with technology, it always has to be this thing. Any technology will do bad things, but it also does good things. We have to do our best to minimize the bad and maximize the good. But we always have to admit that it will do bad. Sorry?
Are we doing our best to minimize?
Well, we have I think this discussion, so it's important to do that. I think it's important to remember, you should not talk, this will happen. Yes, bad things will happen. It's just a question, do we want to accept the best things because the benefits outweigh it? I know you are the moral, you are the ethics.
But do you think that the, let's say, computer science IT community is doing enough to inculcate this and to actually live up to those expectations which are more than reasonable, given the impact that IT has?
Very often it doesn't. It does two bad things. So on one hand, if you think about what we do wrong, is that we actually don't think about it enough. We play around with our toys. I admit guilt there. At the same time, we don't educate people about the dangers. We have this notion, they say, you can build you a toy if you guarantee that it doesn't do this and this. I say, yeah, I can try to fix it. Right? It's this notion of saying, we talk about autonomous cars, and people ask us, will they be safe? And the answer is, they will not. But much less people will die on the streets with autonomous car than die with cars that have been driven by humans.
Okay. Now, is there any question that you would like to bring up yourself? Or of the audience of the questions? Then I would like to close this round with the question. Assume you had one last sentence to transmit to planet Earth, or to humanity, or to some aliens, or what, what is the message that you'd like to convey? Something that would give us on the way to consider for the future. That's a difficult one.
I think my message is that technology is an artifact and we are responsible.
So my message is that despite all the problems, I think that digital technology did a lot to empower the small man, much more to empower him than actually to enslave him. But of course, it is our duty to make sure that it stays so.
So I would say we should not take ourselves too important. We should not have the illusion that we could direct things in a certain way. I think we should not even have the illusion that we understand where they are going. But I think it does not harm to try the best with our very limited understanding to improve things.
Yeah, I think we should harness, attempt to harness the wonderful possibilities and the capabilities that technology has to offer, and should shape it in such a way that it supports us in our moral endeavors to design a society that will lead and make it possible for individuals to lead flourishing lives. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give them a hand.